Welcome to Conversations with Life. We are live today at the Divine Assembly Revival. This is a festival. Hopefully you got to hear our conversation with Steve Urquhart, and that was a great conversation. We're here. We're in our tabernacle in the wilderness. Soch and I blissed out for a weekend in this beautiful place, within this beautiful place, with these beautiful people. So we have a live audience today for this, and we're going to work with their questions today. So this conversation goes live today, and it goes out to all that are here today. And again, I appreciate all that have assembled here, and I'm excited to see what happens. What's going to happen, Soch?
Magic.
So, yeah, this isn't about our questions today, about yours. So who feels like, just kind of feel and see if your question is ready to go, and this is time to share. Who feels alive? Who feels the spark? All right, Summer.
Okay, so this maybe answer comes up a lot because you hear about it, especially in this group, and maybe also especially in Utah, but it's maybe what is or has been the first time that you really questioned your belief system or questioned what you were told your whole life.
So the question is, when do we burn it down?
No.
Just that. What's maybe that first moment?
Yeah, like what's like that first
that you were
moment
like, oh, maybe
you're like,
everything I've been
there's
told
like,
is
something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. For me, it was when I encountered the idea of homosexuality probably like 10 or 11. And heard about like the church's teachings on it, and like there was some major like dissonance in my mind about that, and then my dad trying to sort of explain it to me, and I was like, something's not quite adding up here.
Yeah. Who has a story about that?
I told my dad or my mom when I was about 8, and they were like, you're gonna get baptized and it's gonna be this big celebration, and you're gonna you're gonna join the church and be this big thing. And I remember telling her, I don't know if I want to do that. And she said, don't ever let your father hear you say that. Don't ever say that again. You're gonna do this, and then you're gonna go with it. But at the time I was like, I don't know if this is really what I want to do. And that was the first time really questioning, like out loud, I think. I always questioned the big man in the sky. Where's the proof? But that was the first time.
Yeah. It feels to me like that's the question about the questioning.
Yeah.
Like how do we, like there's a spark in each person that says, I want to know. And I think it says either I want to know myself or I want to know God. And it's the same question, different directions, So to me, that's really interesting. How do we know, like, I have a follow-up question, I think, and that is...
I want to hear some more stories.
Some more stories would be great.
Yeah. I want to hear your story, Summer.
My story?
Yeah. I'm going to move this real quick.
My story, I think maybe the first time, I was pretty young. I was definitely maybe 5 or 6. And, in the LDS church, you're like indoctrinated from day
Birth,
one. Yeah. And one of, I think maybe the simplest teachings is like prayer and like asking God, to do these things. And you just hear, like, you just ask him for anything you want. And we were a single income family. My dad was a police officer. So we didn't really grow up with much. And I really wanted my own money. And I had this little coin purse that was like beaded. And I think I put like a domino in this coin purse. And I prayed all day long that God would turn this little domino into some money
Oh.
for me. And I was so hopeful that he would do this thing for me that my parents, I didn't think my parents had the ability to do. And he did it. And I was always so curious too. And I don't know, that's like such a weird, like, pivotal moment where I felt like at such a young age I was already asking like these questions, like, is this real? Is what I'm being told?
Yeah, and like experimenting and testing the theories. I had some wacky ass prayers like that when I was a kid too.
Did you get the money? Did you turn into
No.
Hence the faith crisis. On the other hand, okay, my daughter was probably about 8, 9 years old, and in her school class, which was a pod class of 3, the teachers decided to incubate some eggs. And so, during that whole incubation time, the children are all jazzed. We're all going to come home with a little chicken. And the day came to open the incubator, and only 2 of the eggs.
This is out of like 50 eggs.
No, 100.
100
There
eggs.
were 100 eggs. 2 survived. And the teachers, of course, were in a quandary. What do we do? 100 kids and 2 chickens. And happened that they decided the next day that I guess there would be a drawing. And Lonnie got up that morning. She got a little shoebox. She shredded up some toilet paper in there.
Decorated it up.
She came out to the kitchen, and it was her birthday. And I said, Lonnie, what is this? And she said, well, this is what I'm going to bring my chicken home in. And I'm like, honey, there are only 2 chances out of 100. Why would you think that you would get one of those eggs? And she said to me, because I prayed for it. Well, as a mother, she went off to school. As a mother, I was praying that day too.
Chicken.
Because I didn't want the chicken.
Truth comes out.
But I surely wanted my daughter to know God. She came home from school with a chicken. Which turned into 2, by the way. We kept the chicken for a couple of weeks, and it was doing really good in her bedroom, and my house smelled like a chicken coop. But
We're not keeping it outside.
no, it was too early. But then it started, kind of fading, and I was like, oh my gosh, now it's gonna die. What am I gonna do? And so someone said, well, put a mirror in the box with the chicken. I said, okay. So I did. That little chicken just perked right up, had company. And then I get a phone call from the other mother. She said, Carol, you've got to take this chicken. I said, I didn't want 1 chicken. I wanted 2. Anyway, finally, after much pleading, I consented, and we ended up with Picky and Pick. That's my story. So it works both ways, darling. Everything works both ways, right? And we're given what we are supposed to receive.
Well, I love the mirror thing in there.
Yeah.
Because it kind of goes back to what Steve was saying, like, one way or another, the big question is, like, who am I and who's God? And, like, sometimes it's looking in the mirror, and sometimes it's going in here, and then other times it's reaching out and seeing, like, what's this other bigger energy out here.
So we have 2 seeds that we planted for cannabis. Identical, they came from the same little package. and we planted them over at Mom and Dad's. And so one, Mom calls Big Boy. It just is taken off. The other one is really little. So I go over, and Mom's put a little flower next to it.
I named it Pee-wee.
Yeah, to give it a little competition, a little self-confidence. All of a sudden, that little cannabis plant is starting to take off next to that plant. It's grown really fast, having that little plant, to have something to, I got to level up a little.
It's also an interesting thing, like the question about the question, and how chickens tend to double, and questions lead to questions. What's that?
The chicken or the egg?
Chicken or the egg, yeah. Questions lead to questions, and this is the thing, when you start questioning, to me, that's almost the path. We've taken it as we need to have answers, and I'm like, maybe we need to have more questions, and questions are a pain in the ass. Answers are easy.
Yeah.
Chickens are a pain in the ass. And they do tend to multiply. Then you have 2 chickens, then you have
But we
4
didn't have any
chickens, then you
bugs
have
in our
8
yard.
chickens.
In the summer.
Yeah, there you go. So the question is, why would you question? Why not just leave things be? Why would you even want things to be different? I'm interested in your answer. What, or your question to that question? What makes it so that you questioned? If your worldview has shifted, and I bet everybody here has had a worldview shift.
I think so we can keep questioning.
So we can keep. Why would you want to do that?
What else would there be to do?
That's my answer. What else we doing? Every time I don't know what the hell I'm doing, I'm just like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
What else are we doing?
That's just a process of letting go. Is not having an answer, just letting go. But what if? Going back to her question, what was the thing that that made you question? I was 50, maybe my late 40s, and I sat in church and I said, what if it wasn't true? What if? Like the question, just the question. And I tried to answer the question, and I had almost an existential break. Like I felt something physically happening in my body and in my brain, because there are no answers. That was the what if. It's true to some and it's not true to others. So is truth absolute? No. So if truth isn't absolute, there are no answers, and there are only questions, and more questions birth more questions.
I say this a different way from my understanding, and I say truth is absolute, and I have no fucking clue how to figure it out.
It's the need to have answers.
Right?
Yeah.
So I believe there are answers. I believe there is an absolute truth. And I have only my perception. And I am a flawed, weird-ass human flesh suit brain thing, And I don't know. I don't know. But I feel like there is a thing that is truth. I don't think that truth is necessarily relative. It's just perceptional, which means it's functionally relative. Anyway, that's a lot of it's subjective to my perceptive capacity, and I am never going to tell anybody what their truth is.
Right.
I just can't. I just don't want to. Why would I do that?
Answers are the past.
What's that?
Answers are the past. You know it. Once you know it, the questions are the future.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that kind of leans into what I imagined when Cedar asked why question, and it really is like our very nature. But I thought about the idea of like form and formless. Like we put ourselves in these containers in order to have an experience, and eventually we're always going to grow out of a container. Just like a little plant that you put in a little, greenhouse, eventually that the leaves are going to touch the edges and start to burn if you don't put it in a bigger container. And I think the questions are what help us break into a new container, and it's because there's something uncomfortable. Often our questions come from our discomfort. So we're sitting in church and it's so comfortable for a while for somebody to feed you the answers and say, this is how you live. And guess what? You don't even have to question it. And if you question it, you're bad. Like, that is a genius policy, right?
Right.
But then there's a moment where something's uncomfortable. And it's like, oh, what if? In those moments of discomfort, there's a what if. And often our discomfort is what is signaling to us that it's time to grow into a new container.
It's kind of interesting when somebody hands you their belief and expects you to believe that belief, and you question it, and then they're fearful. There's a fear in there that you're not following suit and that you're choosing a different direction.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because it's comforting to have that mirror in the box. Yeah. That's like, if you believe the same thing as me, then somehow I feel a little bit more real or here or something.
Yeah. But it's interesting that they feel challenged or fearful that you won't follow suit with what they're offering, handing to you, because you're making a different choice or moving a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, real connection does not require the person to think like me. And we mistake that all the time, or for me to think like them. So we're constantly either trying to get people to jump in our box, or trying to jump in other people's boxes, so that we can relate, so that we can feel human with them, right? But the real box is, or the real non-boxity box is the question. Can you be in the question with me? And my question is, can we build community around that rather than the answers? Can we build community around the question?
No.
Because that's interesting.
Because questions change with everybody. So your questions are something that you can't build a communal piece around, because they flex and change with everybody that comes into the group. So you can have commonality questions, the central themes, but to build a piece, you have to believe that the question is important to even think about it.
Except when you're in a group like this, where everybody's questioning and we're flowing with energies.
Yeah.
Right.
So then I feel like it is communal, because we're in that same flowing however we need to move.
Yeah. I think you can have community without a doctrine to get behind.
Is the doctrine a question, though?
But I think you guys proved that by creating this space, right? And asking us all to come up with a question. You had no idea what we were gonna ask. We're all communally discussing it. We don't know what our backgrounds are or where we're coming from at all. We're proof that it can be done, and it could be done everywhere.
I think for me, it's the opposite of the question, should I leave, can I leave, versus what's the possibility? Because a lot of us leave religion because of something we don't like. What if we left because of that there's more? Like, I think that's what the questions offer is, and could there be more? So much more that we want to leave because we're tired of being constrained. That's the power of a question, is there's endless possibilities. And then we get to free ourselves instead of this, I gotta leave because I don't like this. What if we leave because it's too constraining?
Yeah, and I actually think it's the same question. So constraint is because we feel our wholeness, and it's not letting us expand into wholeness, right? So we leave because there's something we don't like. But on the other side of that don't like is necessarily a like. Even if we don't know what that like is, we feel it in our bodies,
That's the power of community like this, is sometimes we leave for the other side of the question, and then we get here and we're like, oh, we get to live the other side, which is the expanse. We push ourselves out because of the constraint, but the one's constraining is us. And so then we realize there is expanse, but the expanse is also me. And now we leave because of one part of us and we expand into the other part of us, which is endless possibility. Because sometimes it's I don't like that. And so it pushes, but then we realize in that I don't like that, it's because of this constraint.
And we find it. I mean, we don't live in a vacuum. So when we push the thing out or we remove ourselves, we're automatically put what else? The universe fills in that void, and that's expansiveness. And then we push another thing out of our lives, and then the universe again provides, another opportunity for expansion and belief and going in that direction. Like, we aren't in church, but we're here, so, and wherever we're going to be tomorrow is another expansion opportunity. Yeah. It's just endless expansion. Endless. You can turn right or you can turn left.
Yeah. Is there a wrong way to do it? It's like a question. Like, can our answers ever really be wrong?
Only in math.
It's true, but math is an illusion.
Yeah, it's a construct.
It's a construct. So actually, a mathematical equation doesn't tell you the whole truth. It tells you the quantitative truth, but not the qualitative truth.
It tells you the truth because that's the question you're asking. Is
Yeah,
the quantity.
you can. Yeah. So if you can, I think we can get to limited answers. I love Jesus, but Jesus isn't my answer, right? In a certain container, Jesus makes sense. I wear a cross. This has my own very personal symbol on it, right? But the cross within a cross is my personal symbol that I've taken on. And I also wear red Rakshas beads sacred to Shiva. It's like, pick one. No! It's the same story. It's the same fucking thing. Shiva Shakti is Jesus. Jesus Sophia, but we don't talk about Sophia too much. And this lovely, this lovely I know and I don't know at the same time. So for every math equation that I get right, it's a bunch of data that is not answered in that, right? But it gives me some places. Math gives me some places to be, and then from there I can use that to answer the real questions.
Gives you the street light to look under.
Yeah. Thank God we can measure things, and also let's not get caught up in our measuring.
I think we get tied to the structures. I need structure. Like, how did Einstein come up with what he came up with? One of the greatest mathematicians that we know, right? He came up with it because he had this idea of an elevator flying through space, and there's a light beam, and it's like, does it twist? And then the math came to explain that. But what we sometimes think is that the math is where he got, it wasn't the math. The math was how he tried to communicate with us what he was doing in his head. And so that's the thing is, we want math, that's why we want religion, that's why we want community, but what if we just allowed ourselves to go there up into space and to see the possibility and then say, hey, because of this question that I have, let's see if we can share that a little bit with each other. Let's see if we can get that to the point where it is a community shared experience because of this constraining word thing that we got going on.
Hard to get into space without math.
No, I can go there right now.
Watch this.
Bring the rest of us
There's a part of me that is out, brother. See you all the time. Just ask anybody who knows me. I'm in space a lot.
Verified. Yeah, I've had a few conversations this morning about people who have attended some of my workshops this year, and one of the things in those conversations that I've noticed about myself is that over the years my containers and classes have become more in the question, more in the listening and I don't know than I sit down in March and I plan out exactly everything we're going to do when we're at Revival, which when I first started that was more of my jam, and part of that was for me to regulate my nervous system while I did something new. And that's one of the places where answers, they give us something to stand on while we expand, or a place to be held while we grow, or a place to be nourished while we grow. And then this time God just even coming up with something to put on the program. It's like, what if all my classes just say, I don't know, come see.
Get a lot of participation.
There might be nudity.
or we might just sit in the room and vibe.
And I, where I am right now is I have a little bit of an idea of where we're going, and then people arrive, and I'm feeling the energy and listening, and then I just sort of like open into that, I don't know, and that question, and life teaches the class through me. You know, life provides experience, and I love that, because that's a little bit closer to reality, which is kind of like this crazy sort of like non-consensual free fall where everything's actually perfect and okay, but we feel terrified. Like there's, you know, we're always playing around with like the fact that reality is like way more terrifying and big than we could ever like comprehend in our human form, and then dealing with structures and answers in order to like let in a little bit more of that. And I just observed that in myself, in my journey, even just with revival, is that now I'm like a lot more comfortable sitting in front of a group of people and just not knowing what the fuck's gonna happen.
Yeah, and the conversation is interesting, and I don't think it matters who starts it or how it starts. And, you know, I think that gets back to the base of Summer's question, is like, when do we question? Because the conversation is ongoing, and sometimes we start it, and sometimes the universe does. Sometimes we get a push. I mean, a shove. I fucking got shoved.
Trip.
You know, and sometimes we're the shover. You know, we're for whatever reason, push and pull. We're doing this dance, and it's not always easy to know.
Yeah.
You know, the question, you know, one of the things, do we need belief? Do we need to settle on something so that we can act? You know, and I'm not sure, but I know that sometimes I need to act as if, right? So that keeps me in the question, and I know that what I think and what I believe could be bullshit, right? So I don't think 100% certainty is ever healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a certainty that I'm stating as a certainty, and you can all question me. See, there's no end to that. There's no end to that pit, right? You can just go take that, go on, right? And there you are in the existential spiral, and you know, so that's interesting to me. But even a belief about not belief is a belief, and I noticed that settling somewhere, doing something, right? And there starts to be an outline. So, for instance, doing something for another person, seeing somebody and offering from a heart-connected place, not an expectational place, service, something that they need, seems to always work. You know, like that's always a part of worship. Anywhere you go. Some religions that I know of weaponize that. See that good feeling? That means all these things are true, and you have to do all these things and be exactly like we want you to. Isn't it interesting? Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this experience that I've had, and probably everyone in this room has had at some point or another, where someone asks you a question, but they don't really want to hear your answer unless it totally validates what the answer that they already have. I'm sitting here in curiosity around that, and around how much time, you know, especially formerly in my life, I spent trying to navigate other people's perception of me and creating scenarios where like they were feeling the right way about me or seeing me in a certain way, and how frustrating it can be to have somebody ask you something and not listen, you know? And I think sometimes we do that with like God or the universe, where we ask a question and we forget to like drop into listening. And there's so many things that we can listen to that communicate outside of language, outside of mathematics, outside of measurement. And how do we like tune the instruments that we were born with that can listen in more ways than just with our ears or even just with our five senses.
I feel like that's everything. That's it. I mean, I feel like if we're asking the question and we are trusting and somewhat surrendering and tuning to the answers, they come in all different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a beautiful unfolding. And sometimes it takes a really long time and sometimes it's immediate. But I agree that the question itself is like a divine inspiration. I always feel like it's like the curiosity is coming from our divine spark. Like, what is it that I need to know as a spirit right now walking? And so when I ask a question from that place, I usually notice the answers coming all over the place, whether it be a podcast or a book or a conversation or just something I see. Yeah.
Do you listen for the answer?
Yeah.
In some way?
I remember growing up in LDS culture and being an earnest young man, going to his weekly meetings on whatever night it was, I forget, and asking an instructor, and we were just out in the foyer talking, and I asked her, I said, but what if I don't make it to the celestial kingdom? What if I don't make it to heaven? And for those that aren't Mormon, the celestial kingdom is the highest realm where God abides, and you abide with your family and your loved ones. What if I don't make it? And she said, well, don't worry about that right now, Jeff. And that continued to haunt me, but that's when I first started thinking to myself, what if? You know, what if I don't make it?
Yeah, I love that inquiry because I think it comes to a lot of us in different ways of like, will I be included?
Or abandoned to the universe, or
Yeah.
to hell.
Yeah. And what do I have to do to be included?
Yeah.
Do I have to change this thing that God made exactly like this into something else in order to be included?
Yeah. What if I smoked cigarettes, you know, as a teenager or younger? You know, what if I tried alcohol? What if I masturbated? Would I make it?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, God forbid, and people actually having this experience of somebody else, you know, influencing or even inflicting some sort of activity on a child that is forbidden, you know, and so some people at very young ages feeling they're not going to be welcome, they're not going to be included.
Yeah.
Jeff, when I got to that point in my life as a young LDS man, that, wow, at least I'll be with all my friends.
Silver lining.
In heaven, they drink no beer. We would be doing that.
Me with you.
My question now, in like response to that, is why is your God such an asshole? Like,
Exactly.
Better prizes.
Because he's a projection of the distorted male ego, maybe? I don't know. Yeah, that's really, it's really interesting, because in some ways I felt like when I was a kid, I was the question. Like I was sent here into a patriarchal society in the middle of this big Mormon family, and I was sent as I was just naturally connected to trees. I've experienced myself as a tree from the time I was a kid, just natural connection to tree. What do you do with that when you're a kid? And all of a sudden you're shamanically joining and being a tree. You're like, what the fuck is going on? And I'm emotional and sensitive and queer as hell all my life. And I am the question. You are the question. You know, maybe. My very being is the unit of consciousness going, ha, let's play a little trick on this world. Let's send them a curveball. Let's see what happens. We send this one. I think we're all that to some degree, you know. We're all this curveball. Like, what the hell? I mean, Carol starts speaking in light language, and people are looking around going, what's going on there, you know?
And you know, that is one of those things that there's no answer. People ask me all the time, where did that come from? What are you speaking? And it just is. It is something that was gifted to me a long time ago on this path that I'm taking my life through as a shaman. But it was given to me for a purpose, and it's very powerful. And when it came to me, I was like, oh my goodness, where did this come from? Who am I to receive this gift? And I have just learned not to question that. I am what I am. I'm walking the path I'm meant to walk. This is my journey. So I don't question, I honor, I receive. I am a hollow bone to speak, to bless, to heal. There's no answers. I just am. I always have been this. And people say, can you teach me to be a shaman? I'm like, sorry. I didn't ask for this. I didn't seek it. It just is who I am and who I always have been. So I accept that. So there aren't always answers to these questions, and I have questions, and sometimes I'm like, why did this come to me? How do I stop this? I walk by someone, I'm like, oh my God, she needs a healing. But okay, I'm there. I am that tool. I don't know why that's there. It is what it is, and I accept that. So there's some uncertainties, but there are also that certain thing that is in life that is powerful and true. And you just have to own it and accept it and let it be a part of your life and those around you that need you.
It's kind of interesting too, though, like when we're around other people that speak like light language, there's a recognition, you know, even though they don't know. Like I've said to Mom, what are the words? You know, what are you saying? I know the essence of it. I feel the essence, and I feel the essence being around her. But others that have that language look at each other, there's a recognition, like, yes.
Well, you can feel energy moving in somebody, and then that honest expression of how that is with intention. And there's something happening in it. When we first met Carol, and she came and at one point blessed our tent or something, came to the thing and did this, and I just felt this wave of energy go whoosh. It was like undeniable. Something was happening in that moment. At least something was happening in me. Like it moved energy in me, and it made me reverent. I was like, oh, thank you for that blessing. Thank you for being here with us and speaking and moving energy in that way. It might seem nonsense to another, and I might seem nonsense to that. I think I seem nonsense to a lot of people.
Sometimes nonsense is the not knowing.
It's not knowing.
It's that entity that you just don't know.
But when I feel something with somebody, when something happens energetically, that feels more true to me. It's not the truth, but it's true. It's something true happening.
It's pure.
It's pure. Yeah,
it is pure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I loved how Carol said, you know, I just am, and you know, that's also what Christ said. And maybe that's the closest we can get to truth here is I am.
Strong words.
Yeah.
That's not always easy. It's not always easy to be your authentic self. There's so many people judging and ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta. And you have to just push through that, let it go, and say, that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I'm going to be my authentic self. I am going to speak truth. I'm going to live the truth. I'm going to walk with integrity. I'm going to walk with love in my heart. I'm going to walk on this earth in a good way. Don't be afraid to be your authentic self. Honor who you are. Walk in your own moccasins, as it would.
There's an interesting exercise that I used to do with children, that where you go out barefoot and you walk and you feel the energies, so that the earth is accepting your foot instead of you hitting the earth. But feeling those energies with each step, and then feeling the energies around you, whether it's the forest or the desert, or just picking up those energies and then pulling them through, channeling from the sun, pulling that energy of light down to the core of the earth, and then just running it through you as you come together with that step.
I love the word reverence. To feel reverent without the Holy Ghost. I was kicked out of my church for not obeying their teachings and doing some things that they didn't approve of. So I was excommunicated. So according to them, I don't have the Holy Ghost. But I can feel reverent, and I do. And I nurture that. I don't have to pretend that that I have something else to make me reverent.
I call that tripping into grace.
Yeah, tripping into grace. I love that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. To me, the only morality is consent. And what I mean by that is that I can't impose my truth on another person, right? So if I have an offering for somebody, if I have a scene, then I ask, do you want to receive something, And at some point, that could be like, whoa, too much, stop, See? That truth of my truth and their truth meet, but it meets. And I feel like when I'm my authentic self, I meet the authenticity of others, and that's how I feel that I'm in my authentic being. I hit theirs, and whatever their expression is, even if it's fucking weird to me, I recognize the thing that's happening there, the question that's being answered, the work that's being done, and it goes, hi.
The progress.
And it's a delight.
I had this really cool experience once on LSD where, God, it's always hard to find words for these things. I experienced this idea that we are all, like, God's trying to figure out how close we can get to each other and, like, create community, but part of that process is literally destroying each other. But what we're actually destroying is these, like, shells, or, like, almost like idols that we build of ourselves. These identities and images that we're always defending so hard. And what I saw is that every time someone, walks into the room that I'm in, they knock a few bricks off my idol. They knock a few bricks off my statue. And there are moments where that becomes uncomfortable. And I think especially when we have an identity that we're really, defending with all of our might. But that experience on medicine, what that did is it gave me a different perspective, where when that happens, when somebody else challenges me or makes me feel uncomfortable, I'm like, oh, thank you. Thank you for destroying whatever part of me I had built that there wasn't room for you in. Because really, like, we're all of it. And we really are all welcome here. And I've come to love more and more that dance of, you know, this like collision of gods and us all like beautifully and ecstatically destroying each other so that we can come to that essence.
It's like Ragnarok all the time, baby.
It's easy to let your ego get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have to be really careful of that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pause just a minute and we take a breath together. What are we at time?
We've got like 5 more minutes.
What I want to do is get a couple quick hits. Those who have questions to speak them, and we're not going to answer these questions. We're going to sit with them. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to move from discussion to just want to hear your questions. Want to hear what's popping for you for this. Just I want to hear an energy. Feel what that is for you, and I want to sit with your question as a group and just honor the question for a second. Try this as a practice. So who has a question? Yes.
What about suffering?
What about, the question was, what about suffering? And notice how your mind wants to go to answers. Mind doesn't. And just sit with the question. What about suffering? Let's take a breath with that question. And if you're listening, you can do this practice too. Take a breath with each of these questions. All right, another question.
What is your heaven? What is your hell?
What is your heaven? And what is your hell? And feel that question. Notice your mind trying to go to answers. But really be with that question. What is your heaven? What is your hell? Take a breath with it. Ooh, in the question. Who else has a question?
If our spirituality is based off of where we're going, what happens in the present?
If our spirituality is based off of where we're going, what happens in the present? Breathe into that question. Other questions? Is this driving anybody crazy? Yes.
How do we step into play without judging ourselves?
Ooh, how do we step into play without judging ourselves? And sit. Let's take a breath with that.
What of neutrality?
What of neutrality?
What of neutrality?
What of neutrality? How do we stay neutral? Is that another question that follows that well?
If there's, where is bliss without neutrality?
Where is bliss without neutrality?
What is right and what is wrong?
What is right and what is wrong? Both of those. Let's breathe.
A question I've really been sitting with is, how do I listen to and honor my body without reinforcing beliefs about limitation?
Breathe into that one.
Am I willing, or are we willing